Fusion.
Hello, Sam.
Hi, Ian. Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. All right. So, Sam, if you'd please introduce yourself.
Super nice to meet you, Ian. I'm glad to be on your podcast. So I'm Sam. I'm a guy that leads this uCat team, and we are thinking about what can technology do that merges our perception of reality with the technology itself. How can we make technology that is already out there tell us more about the reality that we're interfacing with? And it turns out that the technology that is making its way into market is called a brain-computer interface. However, the implanted brain-computer interfaces that interface with the mind at unprecedented rates don't really have a clear defined set of applications for how they can benefit the first set of users. And we, in this project uCat, have decided to change that status quo. So we've looked at who these who's first users of this technology are. We understood what the technology can do for them, and we came up with a novel application in virtual reality that allows them to express their body, their movement as their virtual avatars. And I'm excited to talk to you about that today with you.
Fantastic. So, there's already a population of people that have these brain computer interfaces.
I think we should distinguish between the invasive brain computer interfaces and the non invasive ones. So we've seen non invasive, really brain computer interfaces kind of celebrate 100-year milestone today when Berger famously published his paper in 1924 on EEG, and there's even a wave of neural activity, of electrical activity that's named after him. But in the realm of invasive technologies, these non-invasive BCIs can tell you some things about how your moods are, what emotions you might be feeling. They kind of plot it on two scales of arousal and valence. So how positively am I thinking emotion? And then to which extent am I feeling an emotion or absence of emotion? And then you kind of feel you can plot that in terms of different states that you're feeling, or it can tell you a few things about your motor intentions. Like, okay, I'm intending to move my arm, but really classifying it to the precise movement of when am I about to move my arm, that's not been possible with non-invasive technologies. Now we have a new breed of invasive brain-computer interfaces that are making their way to market, and they've only been used in around 60 participants, research participants in a very controlled setting around the world. And these technologies fundamentally change this kind of resolution that we have at interfacing with the brain. No longer are you confined to imprecise motor movements, but you can in fact decode individual finger movements, individual arm movements, and even speech, just as I'm talking to you right now.
And you're using machine language to decode some of those signals?
So the way that you interpret these neural activity into some meaningful behavior is progressively more and more done with machine learning. This can be traditional machine learning, but we've also seen deep neural networks that perform increasingly better and more robustly at decoding speech. For example, I give you an example with the state of the art of decoding speech from neural activity to text. This uses a large language model, and the NPTL group from Stanford are the ones that have the status quo, or kind of state of the art speech decoder brain computer interface. And because of this advent of large language models, they use a model that has billions of parameters. They first decode the neural activity into phonemes using an RNN, recurrent neural network. And phonemes are these units of speech, right? So in English language, you have, I think, around 20 something phonemes, which are kind of units of individual sounds that you can make in English language. And then if you construct enough of them in a sequence, you make up words. So they're able to decode phoneme probabilities of what am I thinking about that I'm going to say at like relatively good rate. And we have been able to do that for quite a number of years. But with these large language models, you're able to correct that output of phonemes into words at a rate that's approaching off-the-shelf speech recognition that we use for our Alexa, for our other software, which is really, you can quantify it as less than 10% word error rate. And that's phenomenal. That means that this technology that can decode speech, as I'm attempting to say it, can make its way into a clinic really, really soon, because you can do it at a very high accuracy, and you can do it at a rate which is around 65 words a minute or more. It's about half as fast as I'm talking to you right now.
And your app brings people into a virtual reality environment to learn to use this technology.
And that's right. I think we should say that we are not developing the implanted technologies ourselves. We stand on the shoulders of giants who do, and the shoulders of giants that they stand on for a couple of decades that have developed the basic science to be able to do this. What we do is we give, it's really tedious to train these decoders. For speech particular, it took, in this study that I mentioned, over 10,000 repetitions of here's a word or a phrase, and you try to attempt to repeat it, but without actually saying anything. And that took weeks and weeks of concentrated practice. We would like to make that training experience that calibrates this decoder, but also teaches the user how to use this brain-computer interface as engaging, as fun as possible, and as automated. Because to be honest with you, Ian, to make these technologies available for the 21 million people with severe paralysis, you need to conduct trials that involve thousands and thousands of participants over long periods of time to gather the approval you need from the regulators. And to do that, you can't have four postdocs or PhD students in the room trying to instruct you on how you should perform the task and kind of monitor your progress. So we created an avatar, and this avatar is called uCat. When you put on a headset, you're all of a sudden brought into this virtual reality realm, which is a serene environment with a lot of blue skies and a nice ambient music that we designed for comfort. And you're met by uCat, this robotic cat avatar that explains to you where you are, what's going on, how these tasks are going to look like that you need to perform in order to calibrate your speech BCI, speech decoder. And if you follow those tasks, these tasks are exactly the same as they are done in the research settings, except they're brought into virtual reality. If you follow these tasks, eventually you'll get to master this brain-computer interface, and you will be able to use your speech to not only kind of be able to use the decoder, but to also navigate this virtual world that we built. So if you think about it from top down, we've got a couple of modules here. We've got these modules that in our prototype allow you to kind of calibrate the decoder and learn how to say the words that somebody with speech paralysis, imagine for a decade you're not able to speak. You can finally say a few words and get confident at doing that. And then some phrases as well. That's the second module. And in the third module, we allow people to have a kind of a question and an answer environment with this robotic avatar uCat, with their guide, where she asks them a question and they answer it as they wish. Questions about how their moods are, what the weather is like, what are they feeling like, what have they planned for today. So these are the first, these kind of utterances could be the first ways of expressing themselves after years of paralysis. And we treat that as a form of note taking. And then in the last module, we actually put in an integration with a third-party large language model into the avatar of uCat as well. So the uCat avatar can have a fully unstructured conversation with the end user and simulate a kind of what a normal conversation would look like when this technology perhaps is used for other things like communicating with their loved ones.
So people can practice once they start to learn to train the decoder and to do the things themselves. They have a space where they can practice this before they bring it to the real world.
That's precisely it. Mhm.
Amazing. And you're also getting them to move through the virtual world through their brain signals.
Yeah, so we focused on speech because of this skyrocketed rate of improvement in speech decoding. We started with speech in our prototype, but you're absolutely right. Next on our roadmap is to bring in movement. So virtual reality really, really makes sense once you're embodying an avatar of some kind. Okay, if you, Ian, have used virtual reality, you would know how the immersion really, really kicks in once you see your own hands and you see your own body move as you're moving your body too. And we are lucky to say that the way that maybe let's take a step back. Here we have some other academic demonstrations that do not deal with speech, although speech is also movement, right? You're engaging movements of hundreds of different muscles that are involved in articulation. But other movements that have been decoded are arm movements. These are particularly useful for people with paralysis. And in fact, the market, or rather the kind of group of people who are impaired in terms of their arm movement, upper extremity movement, is even larger than for speech. And they've been able to decode 10 years ago. This is from the Cortical Bionics lab. 10-dimensional movement of the arm. So translation of the arm anywhere you want in 3 dimensions. And then I think it was 6 different grasp types. So like if you see the video, I'm kind of showing what a full grasp looks like. I'm showing what a pinch kind of grasp looks like. I'm showing what the scoop looks like. So these are the bottom fingers. So these are all different kinds of grasps that we were already been able to decode 10 years ago. And these have been decoded by people imagining, or rather attempting to make those movements, although paralysis has forbidden them from doing, prevented them from doing them, from performing them on their own body. So we are lucky enough that they're already thinking about making that movement. Now with virtual avatars, they can see that movement being embodied, that movement being performed. And our goal is to make sure that the breadth of virtual reality, or maybe we can call it the breadth of the metaverse, the thousands and thousands of applications and experiences that are available to everyday users, are also available to those who use these brain implants, these brain-computer interfaces. So in our first set of studies that we are hoping to partner with clinical partners on now, we are focusing on speech because I firmly believe that that will be the first use case that's commercializable on these kind of high bandwidth brain-computer interfaces. But then we also would really need to work on this problem of embodying full body avatars, where we combine speech and movement decoding into kind of realistic extension of oneself onto virtual avatars. So they get to interact with these thousands of virtual worlds, but not only for pleasurable benefits, but also to meet their loved ones, to meet their communities, to engage in the hobbies that they have been prevented from engaging in, and even to return to work. So we're kind of combining these two technologies or rather trends of metaverse and virtual reality technologies being really mature and available for anybody around the world, and brain computer interfaces, which are just about to be commercialized.
Right. It's quite an interesting innovation because you can see how people that are paralyzed would get a lot out of being able to move around in virtual reality, even before you look at any sort of prosthetic or robots that they might be able to control in the future.
Robots and prosthetics are important and often regarded as the first kinds of applications for this high bandwidth brain computer interface that are coming to market. The trouble with them is that the real world is really complex. To interact and manipulate the real world, robots really struggle with it. To do it on an exoskeleton kind of level, where your paralyzed body is kind of engulfed inside of a larger robot that's allowing you to move around, that's decades away. We have seen some demonstrations, but they have only been done in the lab, and this is not something that will come out into the real world very soon. Maybe more realistic are kind of prosthetic arms that can be mounted on different surfaces that perhaps on the wheelchair can allow you to interact with the world around you. And I think those may come to market sooner than decades, maybe half a decade. But these are really, really expensive nowadays. I mean, I've seen studies that have evaluated the cost of these prostheses without being integrated with the brain. These cost somewhere between 30,000 to 50,000 with the brain integration. This can be upwards of 100,000, which is really difficult in terms of reimbursement pathway. You know, how do you pay for this device? I think virtual reality gives people a kind of a stepping stone. You can try to interact with the virtual world as if you were controlling a robot. And if the simulation is convincing, I would say physically realistic enough, that you train in virtual reality and then you transition into the robotic applications when they are finally mature enough for you to use them, I think that's the sweet spot. I think we should treat it as a kind of not either or, but as a progression from you simulate, you train in virtual reality as much as you can. In fact, this is probably what's going to happen, as thousands of people will need to be using this technology in kind of clinical trial settings. You will not have thousands and thousands of robots that they can use because these resources are limited. And as you get more comfortable and confident with the performance that you're able to achieve, you know, you get to then train it on a physical robot or like a prosthetic arm, allows you to engage with the world around you. But you're already you can rest assured that it's safe, it's more reliable. You're not going to hurt yourself or anyone around you because you've practiced tons. I think that's a vision that soon can become reality.
And if we come back to the speech, your first app, when will that become available?
So right now there are 9 companies, 9 startups that share a purse of around $2 billion. Okay, so maybe even to drive the point home, there are around 180 neurotech startups in the world right now. It's a relatively small compounded annual growth rate. And of these 180 startups, only not, they make up maybe $5 billion have been invested in them. And just 9 of them, these high performance, high channel count, each channel records activity from a particular area of the brain. These implanted brain computer interfaces, 9 startups that make these different devices have gobbled up what $2 billion of investment, which is like 1/4 of this entire investment into neurotech. A remarkable amount. And they're all racing to the market now. So we are watching. We are seeing that there are clinical trials being done now. We know that Neuralink has recently published, at least announced that there has been a clinical trial that has successfully happened on their human participant. We know that one company called BlackRock Neurotech has been at it for 30 years with their device called the Utah Array, which is really like the gold standard for making high performance brain computer interfaces. And all of the studies that I have told you about have used that technology to decode speech and decode movement, which some may call that outdated technology. But they have over, you know, they have several dozen, I think they have more than 40 participants using this technology already. And they are engaging in clinical trials as well for a therapy they called Move Again. So try to move again. This is a particular kind of therapy that they're trying to push to market. We have another company called Synchron, and this one is particularly interesting because it requires less invasive procedure to insert the brain implant. Through the jugular vein, it travels like an endovascular implant that looks like a stentrode. It's called a stentrode, but it looks like a stent for the heart. Travels up to an area that's close to the motor cortex where all of this movement, coordination, execution is taking place. And then it fuses with the vascular wall to actually record the electrical activity from within this vein, or from inside the vein, but activity that surrounds the vein, so you can kind of predict some simple movements. And this technology is so little invasive that, now let me get this word right, neurointerventionalists, I think that's the word, special kinds of professions that can perform these procedures in outpatient kind of clinics in 15 minutes, can make this device available to patients. And Synchron is the furthest along. Synchron is currently performing what we call pivotal trials in the FDA jargon. These are like phase 3, late phase trials on many participants. I think they have between 20 to 30 clinical sites where they test this technology with participants. And so I'm really believing that these Synchron stentrode will be the first technology that we'll see in the market, and that can come as soon as they get the note from FDA that their pivotal trial has been successful. That means that they will receive a sort of pre-market approval, we call it. That means they can market their device. Now, whether they get reimbursed or not, that's a separate question. But these devices can make it to market really, really soon, at the end of this year, even. And one more company I should mention, just to kind of keep the record straight, is Precision Neuroscience. They have also published a study that they have done 2 years ago, 2022, but they've published the results now properly, of using, I think it was 6 or 7 participants that have had their brain-computer interface implanted and had amazing yield of signal quality, despite this implant that they have just laying on top of the surface of the cortex. So this is still implanted inside of the brain, inside of the skull, and inside of the dura, this protective film that's around the brain, but it's not penetrating the cortex, unlike Neuralink and BlackRock. So it records from 1,000 channels, just 10 times as much as what BlackRock does, right? The 30-year-old technology that is the state of the art. And it's really flexible, conforms to the structure of the brain. And in this way, they were able to acquire a really nice high quality signal and can also perform these kind of implantations rather with less harm than open brain surgery, removing skull. So they just insert it through this little slit they make in the cranium, in the brain, in the, excuse me, in the skull, and then insert this microelectrode implant or array on top of the surface of the brain. And they've also done clinical trials. So we've got now, out of these 9 companies, most of them doing clinical trials on humans, some of them doing even later phase studies. I suspect that this technology will be out in the market as early as late of this year. And on really the kind of scale that we needed for speech and relevant for uCat, I think this technology will make it to market, in the next couple of years. And it's really now is the chance for us to use our prototype that we've built that's really, really closely modeling the studies on speech that have been done before, use it in clinical trial settings with a lot of these device manufacturers to validate this idea that we've put forward, that virtual reality is a great place, more engaging place for doing these studies, and to talk with people and make sure that those requirements that we've actually put into our prototype are solid, that they are valid, and that we can then be kind of sure when the time comes that this technology is available for everybody who needs it, that it's robust, that it's usable, and that it's most of all, I think, useful.
Is there anything you'd like to add that I haven't asked you?
I think maybe just have a more personal conversation, really, because our project, I think there is quite a number of materials now about us, and I would like to speak maybe more directly to people who might be listening that are fascinated by these technologies of interfacing with the mind at
Yeah.
scale, and just put it out there, right? We have never done it at the scale that I'm just talking about now. So it is still a very tiny window into the brain, into just the upper layers of the motor cortex. And motor cortex is just an area that is really straightforward mapping onto movement. Although I do talk about how the intricacies of how that is done in terms of neural dynamics in a book that I have published in last 2 weeks ago as part of our launch. And it's a small window, but I think it sets the precedent, or sets the stage for kind of whole, we're blurring the boundary between technology and the mind, like we've never done before. I think virtual reality has helped us to understand a little bit about how this blur can kind of take place, that you are now looking at completely 3D generated world. And in fact, these are kind of real people in the world that you get to interact with. And these are real things that you're seeing, right? The ray of light is actually hitting your eyes and it's triggering the same kind of sensation that it would be if you're watching a sunset in more kind of sensory experience way. Some people are getting married in the metaverse. Right? They're integrating this into day-to-day life. They're really drawing no boundary between their virtual selves and real selves. But with the kind of brain-computer interfaces, there are more questions that arise. And some questions are really fantastic and optimistic, but some questions are also very scary. like give you an example for these speech PCIs. When you're decoding the neural activity into words, before the phonemes become words, there's this process I talked about where a large language model corrects your thoughts into the words that you're trying to say. Now, in our app, we've made this little tool where the output, you can always say whether or not it is correct. You can say yes or no. So it's being kind of read back to you, and then you can confirm this is what I meant to say. But when you're deploying this to the kind of more, what would you say, intuitive conversations, you don't really have that comfort of validating yes or no, this is the output or not. And in some way, I think this is the most integrated we've ever been with AI. And in this way, you're thinking about saying things to people around you. And before you're actually able to say it, those things that you are thinking are getting corrected or maybe enhanced or maybe modified by AI. And we should take that very seriously, like that idea of modifying your speech and your thoughts with AI more seriously. And I want to caveat that with just one more comment. These brain computer interfaces that I'm talking about, although there is some other work that is doing kind of stimulation of the brain, these brain computer interfaces that I'm talking about, I'm drawing a line and I'm saying these record the activity from the brain and only work when you attempt to perform a particular movement. They don't listen in on your thoughts, on your internal monologues. When you're deciding to engage a particular muscle, that's when that's when this activity gets decoded, because that's how the decoder has been trained. So it's not like we are giving up our privacy in some way with these first generation technologies. We might be in the future, and we have to address that question as these technologies become more available. But for now, we are extracting attempted speech. We're converting neural signals of that attempted speech into speech. And in the process of that, that speech gets modified by AI.
It's
And
a,
AI is here to stay. So I think we have to think about it in a way of, this is the age of miracles, both on virtual reality front and AI front. Some miracles, can be fantastic and lead everybody to have a kind of renowned hope in humanity. But some miracles we may call catastrophes, and we have to be careful with how we use this technology.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, anyone who's used predictive text on their phone knows that sometimes it just inserts extra words, not just correcting what you've said, but trying to anticipate what you might be saying. And sometimes it goes through without you apparently consenting, and you have to check what it actually said for you. And the idea that I think it's very important what you're saying about it being intentional signals that they're reading, because of course the potential could be there for reading of signals that weren't intentional.
Mhm.
You could imagine, police questioning someone and trying to stimulate them to think about things they're not willing to say.
Yeah, precisely. Law enforcement, psychology, this impacts all kinds of different industries too. I think we see that manifestation of maybe unintended consequences now in non-invasive brain-computer interfaces. I mean, we see it in all kinds of other technologies that are not called brain-computer interfaces, as you point out, uh, which regulate our thoughts, right? With just the content that we consume, right? That's a sort of a stimulation of the eye, right? On invasive content on Instagram or something. But with kind of nefarious monitoring, we can, if the technology falls into wrong hands, it can be catastrophic. So we need to make sure that it is not, and track who has been using the technology and how. But I don't want to scare people, not
No.
at all. I want to tell people that this is actually, fascinating development, and that we've been building technology forever and ever. Technology has been getting smaller and smaller, more intimate, more personal. And now it's getting so intimate that it's beyond wearable. It's implanted, and a lot of people are scared what implanted technologies can do and what side effects they might have. But in fact, these are turning out to be much more better solutions for medical issues because of how targeted and precise the therapy can be, as opposed to of neuropharmaceuticals or pharmaceuticals in general that act on wide networks of the brain or even regions of the brain or the brain entirely. Uh, and also on the kind of consumer side, these do not have to require these implanted technologies, open brain surgery, removal of skull, blood bleeding everywhere. You don't need any of those visions anymore. People are spending billions of dollars, as I've said, to make these technologies kind of interoperative procedures. I have to tell you another stat. In US in 2022, 500,000 women have undergone in 1 year breast augmentation surgery
Mm.
for
Yep.
aesthetic reasons. And imagine how many people with disabilities that cannot move, that are paralyzed, would opt in. Uh, these are paying out of pocket people. Would opt in to receive a brain implant that could finally allow them to express themselves after years of paralysis, years of non-expression, to finally move again, to dance with their partner, whether in the metaverse or elsewhere. How many people would have opted in to do that if it would have changed their life so significantly?
And as you're pointing out, the technology is heading more in the less invasive direction. I mean, one of the principles of surgery today is they want things to be reversible. So if your brain implant starts to degrade or you want to upgrade it, it should be easily removable and replaceable. And I think that's where we're heading, so that it might be less and less invasive and more useful.
I think you're spot on there. I've recently attended a conference where one of the key topics discussed was something in the medical device community known as abandonment. When you develop a device and then the company goes bust, but it already has several people implanted with it, what the hell are you going to do?
Yes.
What the hell are you going to do? You've got a device that might be turned off or on, that nobody can maintain, nobody can service,
Mm.
nobody can deal with, aside from doctors that are not specialized to know what's going on. And if this device is implanted inside of the brain, I mean, you're really screwed. You cannot just develop devices without a plan for how they're going to be explanted, how
Yes.
you're going to service them. So there are certainly a number of kind of big questions that need to be addressed. We have a few comparables to look at. There are a few, maybe I would call them zero generation brain computer interfaces that are implanted, like deep brain stimulation or RNS system for epilepsy. So we have something to look at. But yeah, I think I envision that with companies like Synchron or Neuralink making their first entrance into the market, will fundamentally change what we think about human and what we think about technology. And there will be a lot more efforts that are coming into this space after this initial period, after this initial proof point. And it needs to be done in a way that it benefits the end user. And all of these questions need to be resolved. I think this is a good segue to the book that I wrote
Oh,
and
yes.
published about 2 weeks ago. Because at the moment, these 9 companies that have had billions of dollars of funding, I have not seen a single document produced by any of them that would outline the particular needs and wants of the first users of this implanted high performance brain computer interface. And to add, that is one element of this entire literature. Maybe we can call it a system of information and knowledge that we need to build surrounding these new ways of interfacing with the brain. And because there was no way of knowing how would these patients, how would the first set of users that use this technology benefit from this technology? What is the value that they would extract? After all, these implants, they're just bridges between the mind and the technology. They're not the end user value. The end user value comes with the applications like we talked about, prosthetic or controlling a computer or controlling a virtual reality avatar. And so I decided that because there is no framework for this, I came up with I went through the clinical literature on people with severe paralysis, from ALS to spinal cord injury, high cervical spinal cord injury, and also literature on people using assistive technologies in their daily life. And I've combined all of the outcomes that I could find that influence their quality of life So these are actual studies and questionnaires that are used around the world to ask people, how is your quality of life? What are you able to do? How are you feeling? How are you functioning? How are you reacting to the assistive technology that you're using? And so I've combined all of these frameworks into a set of around 400 requirements that these, or kind of needs of the users, that the technologies, these brain-computer interfaces, should strive to optimize or to deliver through some set of applications. And in later chapters, in chapters 3 and 4, I've actually written how virtual reality plays a role. If these are the set of clinical outcomes that we want, this is how we want the patient, the first user, to feel and to function. How can virtual reality help them to get there? How virtual reality coupled with brain-computer interfaces can deliver on the needs of the patients. And I invite everybody to read it. I think it's a good read. It's open access.
And
And
it's
then
on
the
your
last
website.
chapter, it's on the website, yes, uCat.app. And everybody can then also read in depth how we have built our prototype, what decisions we made. In fact, we open sourced the code for it entirely. We've also open sourced our code for speech decoding, because one thing that I haven't mentioned in this interview was how these decoders that have been developed in the
Oh,
past
hold on.
are
Can I
remarkably.
interrupt you? Can I interrupt you? I'm sorry. We've got about a minute left unless we're going to start another Zoom because they're going to
Oh,
brutally cut us off in about 60 seconds. So I just wanted to warn you so that you didn't get on a roll and then we didn't have a chance to discuss whether you want to start another Zoom session to keep talking.
no, that's great. Let's leave it as a cliffhanger, Ian. And next time we meet, we can talk about the speech decoding AI work that we're doing, which
All
is,
right.
I think, equally as exciting as the XR work,
Well, thank you, Sam. It's
extended
a
reality work.
really fascinating subject.
It was a pleasure to talking with you, Ian. I really enjoyed it. I think we can have hours and hours more of discussion. I couldn't shut up about all the questions you were asking me, and it was so fun to talk with you.
It's a lot of fun.
Thank you, Ian.
Fantastic. All right, I think we're going to get cut off at, it now says less than a minute. So thank you again. Sorry to cut you off though, because you're on a roll there.
No, it's awesome. It's great. I cannot shut up. You're letting me talk, which is just fantastic. And